Welcome to the Local School Governance Series, a series developed by Avondale Business School on behalf of Adventist Schools Australia for Seventh-day Adventist schools who are part of the ASA network. This is being presented by Warrick, the current head of the Avondale Business School. In this particular presentation, we'll be looking specifically at the Local School Advisory Council of the SDA schools. Adventist Schools Australia has commissioned a series of governance resources to assist local schools in fulfilling their governance responsibilities. This particular series explores the role of the Local School Advisory Council, looks at the secrets to effective meetings, and how to build positive relationships for enhanced school governance. In this presentation, we will explore the Local School Advisory Council, beginning with its origins and then moving to its purpose, role and responsibilities, as well as examining some key relationships. We will also discuss the membership and meetings of the Council, and then finally we'll propose some next steps for you to consider before highlighting a number of resources available to you as a Local School Advisory Council. Historically, Seventh-day Adventist schools typically grew out of a local church, who also then administered the school, including the collecting of school fees and appointing staff. As the organised Seventh-day Adventist Church in Australia matured and grew over many years, local churches became organised into local conferences, and these conferences were then in turn organised into union conferences. During this time of growth and maturity and development, it became apparent that there was a need, and indeed an advantage, to bring some consistency into the administration of these local SDA schools, and consequently a Conference Board of Education was established in each local SDA conference to coordinate the policies and practices of the SDA schools within its jurisdiction. The respective union conferences then also coordinated a national policy approach for SDA education within Australia. The local school board, however, was still the management body of the local school, and this was within the policies administered by the national body. However, these schools were still largely local church based. Over time, the conferences began to coordinate these local schools into a more systemic approach, until finally in 2003 these systems were incorporated into separate education companies. So while there was change and evolution of the management of the Seventh-day Adventist schools over many years, the most significant change occurred in 2003 when each SDA local conference throughout Australia incorporated separate companies to operate their church, aged care and school operations. These companies operate as trust entities, and they are owned by the respective conference and operate these specific activities of each conference within their respective jurisdiction. Each company is governed by a constitution which outlines its objects and purposes and requires the company to operate in harmony with the principles of the Seventh-day Adventist Church and to comply with the working policies of the South Pacific Division, AUC and conference school companies. Adventist Schools Australia, under the jurisdiction of the AUC, is an advisory body to the system of schools, entities and offices offering SDA education in Australia. This diagram illustrates the current structure of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. This green level represents the worldwide church, which is administered through divisions, of which we in the South Pacific are one, and our division is the South Pacific Division. This purple level are the various union conferences within the South Pacific Division, and there are 4. Our union conference is the AUC, or Australian Union Conference, and part of its role includes operating Adventist Schools Australia. This pink level are the local conferences. There are 9 in Australia, which are essentially grouped around geographic regions. The orange sections represent the three companies used by each conference for their activities, and there is the church, the aged care, and the educational school companies. The red level represents the trusts who have the delegated operational responsibility for the activities of the company above. Finally, at this blue level are the activities themselves, which include, under the education company, individual schools. With that background to the local SDA school, we'll now turn our attention to the purpose of the local school advisory council, which includes the role, responsibilities, and some very important relationships. Before launching too deep into that, however, let's just spend a few moments to clarify some terminology. Let's pause this presentation for say 6 minutes or so, and as a group, discuss how you interpret these key terms: management, collaboration, and advisory. When you've had your discussion, simply restart this presentation to continue. So how did you go? It's important to ensure that we're all on the same page when using these terms in the context of our local SDA schools. So throughout this series, we'll use these terms with the following common understanding. For management, we refer to the operational day-to-day running of the school. For collaboration, this refers to the action of working with someone to produce or create something. And then finally, advisory is having the role of giving advice and making recommendations, but not taking action enforcing them. So they're the terms that we'll use throughout these series. So let's now consider the role of the local school advisory council. It's important to note that the local school advisory council is not the management of the school. That role belongs to the principal. Instead, the local school advisory council is an advisory role, and it supports the principal meet the expectation of the conference schools company board of directors. This is a common theme that we will come back to consistently throughout this series. Note also that this obligation of the local school advisory council is to the conference schools company as a whole, and not just singularly focused on any individual school, and we'll elaborate more on that in just a moment. But note that the conference schools company board of directors delegates oversight of the management of the schools to their director of education. The director of education then delegates operational management of the school to the principal. And the local school advisory council has some particular responsibilities delegated to it. Then the principal and the local school advisory council collaborate to meet their respective delegations. This is very critical to understand, remembering that the principal manages the school and the advisory supports the principal. Advisory members are not involved in the day-to-day running of the school, nor are they the official spokespersons of the school. Rather, that will be the principal or the conference director of education. Looking deeper at the role of the local school advisory council, we'll now explore some of these more specifically. In all things, the local school advisory council must remain faithful to the conference schools company policies and procedures. And as mentioned previously, the conference schools company will delegate different levels of responsibilities to different schools. So it's important for you to find out from your conference director of education exactly what has been delegated to your local school advisory council. Examples of what may but not necessarily always are delegated could include approving submissions to the local schools company, submissions along the lines of strategic planning, budgeting or capital. There also may be oversight of compliance with legislation, policies and approved procedures, including the conference school company policies. Or it may be participation in the Quality Adventist Schools Framework, which is a school improvement process. One of the really important responsibilities is to regularly undertake reflection and review of the mission of the SDA school and its quality and effectiveness. And this can best be achieved through participation in the Quality Adventist Schools Framework process. There are a number of key relationships involving the local school advisory council that we should just explore for a moment or two. The first and most important of these is with the local school principal. The local school advisory council is advisory, remember, and works collaboratively with the principal. The converse is also true. The principal needs to think collaboratively and seek engagement with the local school advisory council and indeed the wider school community. Note importantly, the local school advisory council does not employ the principal and has no employment relationship with them. In fact, it is the local conference schools company who employs the principal. The second of these relationships is with the conference schools company. The local school advisory council is ultimately responsible to the conference schools company for any delegated responsibilities and to also uphold their policies and procedures. The third of these key relationships is with the wider school community. While not directly involved in the day-to-day operations of the school, it is still important for the local school advisory council members to understand what is happening within the school and its wider community. Having reviewed the local school advisory council purpose, role and responsibilities and relationships, we'll now turn our attention to considering membership of the local school advisory council. This includes the size of and the composition of the council and the tenure of its members. The size of the local school advisory council is determined by the conference schools company, but will typically be between 5 and 11 members. A larger school advisory council is permitted with written approval from the conference schools company. And in certain circumstances where schools struggle to form a functioning school advisory council with a minimum of 5 members, a management committee may be formed, but that's beyond the scope of this presentation and falls under a different policy which is available from your conference director of education upon request. There are 3 types of local school advisory council members. The first is ex officio. An ex officio member is someone who is a member by virtue of their position. On the local school advisory council, the principal is an ex officio member. The principal also serves as the secretary of the local school advisory council, although someone else may be appointed as a recording secretary to help the principal. That person, however, does not have a vote or a right to discussion in meetings of the advisory council. The second type of member is an appointed member. Appointed members are appointed by the conference schools company to the local school advisory council, and we'll discuss that process in just a few moments. The final type of member is an invitee. These are persons entitled to attend and participate in discussion but do not have a vote. In the SDA schools, these include the conference officers, the conference director of education, and the schools company CEO. The members of the local school advisory council are formally appointed by the conference schools company board of directors, who receive advice from the conference director of education based on consultation and recommendations from the local school advisory chair and principal. The appointment of the local school advisory chair follows a very similar process. Finally, the local school advisory council member accepts their appointment and by doing so agrees to a number of things. They agree to adopt the Adventist Schools Australia Local School Advisory Council Members Code of Conduct. They also agree to abide by the ASA Local School Advisory Council policy. They also agree to undergo any checks required by respective state or territory laws, the outcomes of which may preclude some people from being a member of the local school advisory council. And finally, They also agreed to participating in induction and ongoing conference school company and ASA professional development and spiritual growth activities, in particular relating to the Adventist identity and mission. The terms of appointment for a local school advisory council member are in harmony with the respective local conference constituency meeting cycle, which may be 3 or 4 years, depending on your particular conference. If a local school advisory council member is appointed during one of these cycles, their term finishes at the same time as everyone else, at the conclusion of that constituency meeting cycle. Local school advisory council members may be appointed for a second consecutive term. And in specific circumstances, a local school advisory council member's term may be extended beyond a second term, but that requires consultation with and approval from the conference schools company. The term of the chair of the local school advisory council follows the same cycle and conditions as for council members. In addition to instances of resignation or expiration of their term, the membership of a local school advisory council member may be terminated by the conference schools company. There is a process outlined in the relevant policy that needs to be followed in these cases, and this policy is available from your conference Director of Education upon request. So the local school advisory council member, their status is that of a volunteer, working collaboratively with the principal in the stewardship of the school within the context of Adventist education. The trustees of the conference school companies will ensure that, to the fullest extent that the law will allow, every member of the local school advisory council, committee, or working party is indemnified against civil liability, including liability for legal costs, for everything that they do in good faith in the course of discharging their duties. The criteria for membership of a local school advisory council is firstly to be a practicing member of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and also includes demonstrating an understanding and being committed to the ethos of Adventist education, and also being supportive of the SDA Church and Adventist education. A maximum of 1 staff member can be appointed to the local school advisory council, and this staff member's appointment will not be in a representative capacity, but rather as a leadership development role. Also note that typically no staff spouses would be members of the local school advisory council. Members also agree, as mentioned previously, to an induction process when they become members. The local school advisory council members also need to have the capacity to contribute skills and knowledge to a local school advisory council that complement those of other council members, resulting in a council with skills that align with the needs of the school. Examples of these skills include finance, building, marketing, project managing, etc. What exactly those skills are for each school depends on the particular needs of each individual school and may change over time. We suggest at this point that you pause the program and engage in this group activity. Why don't you discuss what the ideal skill mix for your school might be at this particular point in time? Spend up to 5 minutes doing that, and then think about another 5 to 10 years time and spend another 5 minutes or so thinking about what skills your school might need at that time. Included on this slide are some potential skills, but don't just be limited by these. So pause the program and then restart when you have done this. So how did you go with that particular activity? Do you think you might need to consider some changes into the future? Well, as an example, we have included a skills matrix spreadsheet of a fictitious school of what they have determined their required skills are and what their desirable skills are. Listed here are the requisite core skills which they deem to be education, financial, building, marketing and project management. They would also like some people who've got legal, management leadership skills, property development or HR, but they're not as critical. They've then listed all their current members, from their principal through to their chairperson and so on. And next to those names, they've then listed what skills they bring to the local school advisory council. In this example, the school requires someone with marketing skills, but members currently don't have any of these particular skills. So this school now needs to decide if it's going to change its membership to acquire these skills or some other course of action. Now, in addition to the previous criteria, there are expectations required of local school advisory council members. The first is to participate in training and spiritual renewal. This includes the Quality Adventist Schools framework process. The second is to apply ethical principles, as would be expected. Thirdly, to act in good faith with care and diligence, which essentially means acting lawfully in accordance with approved policies and procedures of the Seventh-day Adventist Church and the Conference Schools Company. Fourthly, is to act in the best interests of the school's company. That means not putting you or anyone else's interests ahead of the Conference School Company. And then finally, it's to comply with the Members' Code of Conduct. We will explain the Members' Code of Conduct a little later in this presentation. Moving on from the local school advisory council membership, we're now going to look, albeit briefly, at the issue of meetings. And it's brief because there are other programs in this local school governance series that will go into deeper detail on the running of effective meetings. As mentioned previously, other programs will explore meetings deeper, but there are some points for us to note for this particular presentation. Firstly, note that there should be a minimum of 6 meetings per year of the School Advisory Council. These dates would be determined by the Chair in consultation with the Principal and the Conference Director of Education. The quorum, or the minimum number of people necessary for a meeting to be considered valid, is a simple majority of members. That is, if the Council has 5 members, then there would need to be 3 people present. The principal or their delegate must attend a meeting for it to be considered to have formed a quorum. The minutes of the meeting also need to be signed and forwarded to the Director of Education and the school's company secretary at the earliest possible convenience. We're now going to offer a few comments regarding decision making within the local school advisory council. All decisions really need to be made in harmony with conference school company policies. It's important to note that the local school advisory council is not permitted to operate outside of these policies. The goals of all decisions should be to be made by consensus where possible, but occasionally, if it is necessary to have a vote, then a simple majority, which is 50% or more of the members attending the meeting, will carry the day. The chair has no casting vote, and also remember that invitees have no right to vote. Where there may still be some disagreement, particularly between the local school advisory council and the principal, then the matter needs to be referred to the Conference Director of Education to seek their advice. Note that in the meantime, the status quo prevails. Also note, importantly, that there is no form of proxy or mail votes. Members must be present at the meeting for their vote to be counted. In order to save time in local school advisory council meetings and to use more specialised skills, it may be that subcommittees are established to deal with some specific activities. These activities would be outlined in terms of reference, and they would detail the membership and activities of the subcommittee. Examples would include finance, and it's strongly recommended that each local school advisory council set up a finance subcommittee. But you may also set up subcommittees to deal with strategic planning, marketing, etc. Membership of these subcommittees are as approved by the local school advisory council, but must include at least 2 school advisory council members. And note also that the chair and the principal are entitled to attend any meeting of a subcommittee, even if they haven't been appointed as members. A quorum is just a simple majority, but must always include at least 1 local school advisory council member at all times. In the case of a finance subcommittee, there are some additional provisions which include one of the local school advisory council members must be the chair, and that the principal, and where there is one, school business manager, are automatically ex officio members. As a start to this process of subcommittees, here's an activity for your group to do right now. Spend, say, 5 to 7 minutes just discussing what subcommittees might be beneficial to your school as it's happening. What activities might be delegated? Who should be on them as members? So pause the program now and then restart it again when you've had a healthy discussion around subcommittees. So that would have been an interesting discussion. It would have been fun to have been a part of them. Let's look at an example of the very basics of what a marketing subcommittee, for example, might look like. In this particular case, the membership has been the principal, 2 local school advisory committee members, one of which is to be the chair, and also the chairperson from the Parents and Friends Committee, and then 2 other people from the school community. They might be people who have particular expertise in the area of marketing. The activities that this subcommittee have been appointed to do are to plan and recommend a calendar of marketing events, to coordinate marketing activities, and to develop marketing resources. But there could be a range of other activities that they've been asked to do. Anyway, hopefully that can help you get started if you haven't already getting subcommittees appointed. Previously in this presentation, we've referred to the Members' Code of Conduct. We're now going to spend some time looking specifically at this. You'll recall that policy includes a clause that by accepting their appointment to the local school advisory council, a member agrees to abide by this code. Essentially, the code of conduct can be separated into 2 distinct parts. The first is dealing with the individual local school advisory council members' responsibilities. The second, their conduct. Let's look firstly at the responsibilities. The first of these is to acknowledge that ASA schools operate as part of the educational mission of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. The second responsibility is for a member to develop a deeper understanding of and commitment to the mission of Adventist education and promote it within the relevant community. The third responsibility is to develop an understanding of the core ASA and conference school company documents in relation to Adventist identity, school improvement, and compliance. These documents are available upon request from your conference Director of Education. The fourth responsibility is to engage in continuing education about the responsibilities of School Advisory Council members. This presentation is a part of that, and well done for being in it. The fifth responsibility is for members to exclude themselves from making public statements on any matter which could be perceived as reflecting the position of the school. Such public statements will be made by the principal or the conference school company Director of Education. The sixth responsibility is to undertake the reading and preparation required for each meeting. Being prepared for meetings helps the meetings run more effectively and efficiently and honours the time of the people who have volunteered to be members. The last responsibility involves undertaking school council committee work as required. That is, to be a help in sharing the load amongst the subcommittees. The second part of the Code of Conduct for local school advisory council members concerns their individual conduct. The first of these is to demonstrate school advisory council solidarity by being loyal to the school advisory council decisions, even if personally opposed to the final recommendations and decisions. Please note that a vote of the council binds all the council members, so even if you didn't vote for it, you have a responsibility to subsequently support that decision. Secondly, respect the confidentiality of school advisory council matters and don't misuse information or your position. Thirdly, keep an open mind and be willing to enter into dialogue through being alert to alternative solutions. Even though you've been appointed for your unique skills and knowledge and experience, so have the other members and may even have better insights than you on some issues. So keep an open mind for the benefit of the school. Fourthly, you need to maintain clarity between the role of the School Advisory Council, the Conference School Company and Adventist Schools Australia, and not intrude into the principal's direct management of the school. This is another reminder that the local school advisory is advisory only, and it is the principal who's responsible for the management and day-to-day operations of the school. Fifthly, prior to discussion and decision making, it's important that you declare any real or perceived conflicts of interest and consult with the chair of the council regarding possible implications. This protects everyone from the perception of favouritism. Sixthly, support colleagues on a school advisory council through reflection, prayer, courteous and warm relationships. The local school advisory council is not a battleground or a venue for settling personal grievances. Keep it Christian and courteous at all times. And then lastly, protect the good name and reputation of Adventist education, the school and its community, and the School Advisory Council, as well as the Conference School Company and Adventist Schools Australia staff. Having taken a tour now through the local School Advisory Council, there are a few things for you to consider doing next. Firstly, you should confirm with your Conference Director of Education a few things about your particular local School Advisory Council so that you have a clear context within which to operate. You might firstly confirm what size your local School Advisory Council should be. Is it 5 members, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11? What is the correct number for your advisory council? And what is your term? Are you serving for 3 or 4 years? And then finally, when does your current term end? Then, if you've not already done so, you should probably develop a vision, mission and strategy for your local school to ensure you have a clear direction to guide your discussions and your decision making. You should also be thinking about developing what skills does your local school advisory council require, and do you have the right people with them? If not, what are your plans for getting those skills? And then finally, what subcommittees do you need? Who will be the members? What will be the terms of reference for those subcommittees? That brings us nearly to the end of this presentation. We're just going to spend a few moments looking back at what we've already covered. We looked at the origins of where the local school advisory council has come from. We considered the purpose, role, responsibility and key relationships of the local school advisory council. We also looked at who the members are and how they were appointed and their tenure. Then we considered a brief look into the meetings of the local school advisory council, noting that other presentations will consider this more deeply, but we did mention some procedures, decision making and subcommittees. We also reviewed the members' code of conduct, and then finally We suggested some next steps to ensure your local school advisory council is operating as effectively and as efficiently as possible. Before we conclude this presentation, however, there are a range of resources available to your local school in relation to good governance and advisory councils, and we'd like to make sure you're aware of these. Here are a range of resources that you might find useful, including from Adventist Schools Australia, Avondale Business School. There is a link for administrators for Adventist Schools Australia that take you to all the different independent school associations within Australia. The Australian Charities and Not-for-Profit Commission, Christian Ministry Advancement, who have some excellent material on boards, and finally our community, which has some great resources for local groups. Thank you for participating in this edition of the Local School Governance Series, where we've looked specifically at the Local School Advisory Council. We hope you found it really useful. We would very much appreciate if you would complete a very brief and anonymous feedback survey that will help us to continue to improve the resources we offer you. Simply go to the survey link here and complete the survey. If you have any further questions or comments, please do not hesitate to contact either Adventist Schools Australia or the Avondale Business School via the contact details listed on this page. Best wishes for you and your local school.